Mark Rogers, TV talking college football. As always, we are the voice of college football. We got John Bryce on the line from Gridiron now as we get you set for the orange and the white from Neyland Stadium on Saturday. John, how you doing this afternoon?
Great, Mark. Glad to be with you.
Yeah, we appreciate you stopping by and getting us set for Jeremy Pruitt's first game of sorts. Of course, there's no winner, there's no loser. Everything's all good, and we can head towards September 1st after this one, and hopefully everybody stays healthy. So your thoughts about the quarterback situation, which of course is front and center based on what you've seen up close and personal.
Well, I think first and foremost that it's a big day for both Jarrett Garantano and Will McBride, but nothing's going to be settled because Keller Chris doesn't arrive from Stanford until sometime next month and pushes in towards the onset of June workouts and summer throwing sessions and all of that. But still, it's a vitally important day for both quarterbacks because those guys have to capitalize on every opportunity that they possibly can while it is a two-man race. And it has to be considered a two-man race right now just because those are the only two guys on campus. But Keller Chris is going to come in with the most experience of any of the trio. He's got a very steady hand, and he presents a lot of physical and intangible attributes that I think will make him a real factor in this summer.
Steady hand certainly would be apropos, I think, in describing Keller Chris at Stanford. He lost the job for certain reasons, but he also was the starting quarterback for a pretty good football team that was typically in the top 15 to 25 when he was the starting quarterback. So he's won some big games and he's played well for the most part. Based on what you've seen of the other two, if you had to make a call right now, or if you could at least distinguish the two quarterbacks based on skill set and what they bring to the table, what would be your call there?
Well, I think Jarrett Garantano probably has the more upside and probably has a little bit more zip on his throws and presents the bigger ceiling. I think that McBride is a lot like Chris in that he is a very steady hand. He makes smart throws. He doesn't get you in a lot of trouble. He won't necessarily stretch the field the way that I think Jarrett Garantano can, but McBride is a better athlete than a lot of folks give him credit for. And again, he's good at going through his progressions. He's good in that pro-style offense, whereas Jarrett Garantano has been more of a spread quarterback, more tailor-made for the old offense that Tennessee was running under the previous regime. So I think it's been a study in contrast. Jarrett Garantano had a couple of big touchdown passes in the Vols scrimmage last Saturday, which I think a lot of insiders would tell you was the most important scrimmage of the spring. But they also said that there were some passes missed and that it was hard to really tell because those guys were wearing the black non-contact jerseys and it just wasn't the same, or it was indicated to me that both of them, but particularly Garantano, might have been whistled down for some more sacks.
And one of those Garantano touchdown passes going to Marquez Callaway. He's obviously a proven commodity, one of the few on the offense. So when you look around at the playmakers or the would-be playmakers, who gets you excited?
Well, Marquez Callaway, for one, he's a guy that I had really high expectations for going into last season. Matter of fact, Zach Azzani reached out to me this week. He's now coaching wideouts for the Denver Broncos, but he recruited Callaway and brought him to Knoxville. And he was sort of just talking about like CJB. That's what I knew all along about Callaway. So a lot of people are really excited about Callaway. Brandon Johnson, his father, of course, is Charles Johnson, the former World Series champion catcher of the Florida Marlins. He has had a very steady spring, and another one of those touchdown receptions from Garantano last weekend was Brandon Johnson. And then Juwan Jennings is a guy that has worked his way back into the team. I think he still has to walk a very delicate line between now and September, but he's a difference maker. So I think right now the Tennessee wideouts are the strength of the offense and a weapon that people aren't talking about a whole lot. That's a new wrinkle for this offense, but a little more common from what we've seen at Alabama in the last few years is fullback Jaquan Blakely. And he had a big day last Saturday in that scrimmage. He's had several big days over the course of the 14 spring practices now that Tennessee has had. And I think that Jaquan Blakely is a guy that I don't know how much Jeremy Pruitt will show in the orange and white game, just because I think he'll wait and let people sort of be overall surprised by Blakely, but that's a new physical presence that Tennessee is going to have, both as a lead blocker and as a guy that they can slip out of the backfield and do some things.
John, it's crazy when you mention the name Jawan Jennings, because here we are less than 2 years removed, about a year and a half from some of the bigger catches that he made for the Vols in a season in which it looked like Tennessee would emerge as the team to beat in the SEC Eastern Division. Finally broke that stretch against Florida. He made some huge plays in that game, and then the reception against Georgia to win that football game. And here we are just a year and a half later, new coach on the sideline, completely different look, coming off 8 consecutive losses in the SEC, and that's how times change. But Jawan Jennings still in the mix and counted upon to make big plays for the Vols on offense. John Bryce joins us from Gridiron now to break down Tennessee in the SEC Eastern Division. John, when you look at the defense, what do we see out there? Who should we look for on Saturday?
Well, Nigel Warrior in the very back end of the defense is sort of that really physical presence at safety. This coaching staff, I think, is doing a better job of moving him all over the field. He's more comfortable than he's been in either of his previous 2 seasons, which should be the case. You should be more comfortable as a junior than as a true freshman. But I just think that they're doing a little bit better job of utilizing his skill set. He can sort of walk up near the line of scrimmage, almost like in a star position, and do some things for the Vols there. He's a really ferocious hitter. He's a really ferocious competitor. I think Cortez Sapp is a guy at linebacker. He recovered a fumble last weekend. He's healthy. He's motivated. He was a 4-star guy that was a big get for Tennessee out of Georgia, coming out of high school, a really hotly contested recruiting battle. Auburn was in the mix. Virginia was in the mix. So were some others. But Tennessee was able to land Cortez Sapp, and he's a guy who hasn't been able to stay healthy. But if he stays healthy, it wouldn't surprise me to see him be Tennessee's leading tackler in the fall. So those are 2 guys that immediately jump to mind. I think Kyle Phillips along the defensive front could be poised for a really big year. Darrell Taylor will play kind of that jack position some, where they can walk him up to the line of scrimmage, stand him up, or he can play with his hand in the ground. So right off the bat, those are some guys. The depth is not great for Tennessee, and they've not had Daniel Batuli and Darren Kirkland Jr. essentially at all this spring. Those are 2 linebackers that automatically factor greatly into things when fall camp opens up in August. So you'll see some guys that Tennessee will have to rely on in the fall, but by no means will it be a complete picture on the defensive side of the ball.
We've got John Bryce on the line from Gridiron now, breaking down the Vols as the orange and the white clash at Neyland Stadium on Saturday. It's an SEC Network game at 2 o'clock Eastern time. And looking at the rest of the SEC Eastern Division, John, of course, Georgia, there could be an argument that they have the biggest gap between them in terms of what's expected and the talent that's proven on that roster, despite all the NFL losses, versus the rest of the division. Maybe the biggest gap there between first and second of any team in college football. South Carolina goes from 3 wins to 6 to 9. Will Muschamp maybe proving that he's more than a defensive coordinator. I have to sometimes catch myself, John, because I typically just think of this division as Georgia, Tennessee, and Florida, and then everybody else. But it's a much different division than it's been in the past. Mizzou took some strides under Barry Odom. Kentucky went to a bowl game last season for the first time in a while. Just your thoughts about, or the second consecutive season after a gap there, after a drought for the Wildcats under Mark Stoops. But just your thoughts about the division, and maybe a different take than maybe the cut and dry take. Who could possibly jump out and surprise us?
Well, I think that Florida has the ability to jump out and surprise. There's still some nice talent on the Gators roster. I think that at South Carolina, I've talked with some folks in Columbia and talked with some coaches that have been at some of South Carolina's practice. I think the key thing for the Gamecocks is going to be the running game. How much can the Gamecocks lean on that running game when they need to? And you wouldn't expect to say that about a Will Muschamp team, but I think that South Carolina really threw the ball around a lot this spring with Bentley. Debo Samuel, when he's healthy, is about as electric as anybody in the SEC. He's a big-time player. Missouri, there's a lot of Tennessee eyes looking that way to see how Derek Dooley does in his return to college football as an offensive coordinator. He has not been an offensive coordinator before, but Drew Lock said that Derek Dooley was a big reason why he elected to return to Missouri and is really encouraged by what the Tigers are going to do on offense under Derek Dooley. So for me, those are the teams that provide some intrigue, particularly I think South Carolina and Florida this year. If anybody can catch Georgia, it would be one of those two teams, or if anybody could try to trip up Georgia, it'd be one of those two teams. Tennessee just really has a what I like to call a widowmaker stretch of schedule, where they've got 6 games that includes like Auburn, Florida, Georgia, Alabama, South Carolina. I'm leaving out one really good opponent, but it's the meat of the season, and Tennessee has a 6-game stretch that I don't think will be rivaled, not just by anybody in the SEC, but anybody in college football. So because of that, I think Tennessee has to set modest goals under Jeremy Pruitt. I think they'll be a much more fundamentally sound football team. I think they're already, in a lot of ways, a better coached football team. I think Butch Jones made a tremendous mistake with his moves at offensive coordinator after he lost Mike DeBoer. Frankly, I think he should have fought a lot harder to keep Mike DeBoer. And then we saw just an abysmal Tennessee offense last year under Larry Scott. It was really dreadful. So I think Tennessee's better coached. I think they're more fundamentally sound. I think they'll fight better in a lot of games, but I just think they've got some holes, and they have to go to Athens, and you can't overlook that, especially as part of that stretch of games that Tennessee has to play.
Yeah, Tennessee with that automatic disadvantage of having to play the Crimson Tide each and every year is that cross-division rivalry. And then when the rotation comes up on Auburn and they just went 7-1 last year, you're looking at 2 7-1 teams in the SEC last year, one the national champion, and it's by far the toughest road of any team in the SEC Eastern Division, having to play the two from the West. Interesting take on Butch Jones, John. I'd like to get your further synopsis of what went wrong there, because even though the wins weren't coming against the elite teams, they were on the cusp. What was it, that 2015 season with the double overtime loss to Oklahoma, taking Alabama to the last drive of the game, the Arkansas game slip away. Of course, they had the 4th and 16 game against Florida, but they looked to have, after that run of top 5 to 15 recruiting classes, the talent, and then at that point, the veteran leadership to make that run, and it just didn't happen. And then you mentioned the offensive coordinator change. Did you think that that was what really tipped the scales and sent it downhill the other side?
Yes, I do. I think that Tennessee was very close for a couple of years under Butch Jones, but I have a saying I like to use: you never get those wins back. You can never get that win back from 2015 against Oklahoma. And really, a lot of people started to sour on Butch Jones in that game when he, at home, elected to kick a field goal early in the game, literally from inside the 1-yard line. I was the sideline reporter at that time. It was about the half-yard line. And Tennessee elected to kick and get the early 3. And the Vols defense was playing good, and nobody knew what Baker Mayfield was going to be at that point. But a lot of those games, that Florida game, you had a 27-14 lead in the fourth quarter, I think with 10.5 minutes to go, and kind of found a way to lose that game. And that was too often the problem. And really, in 2016, for that team to have gotten off to a 5-0 start and have Texas A&M on the ropes and be on the verge of a 6-0 start, it's important to remember the Vols fell behind double digits to App State, Virginia Tech, Florida, Georgia. I mean, almost everybody during that stretch. Ohio was the only team that the Vols didn't fall behind by double digits as they opened the season 5-0. They kept finding ways to win. A guy like Jawan Jennings makes a singular once-in-a-lifetime play at Georgia that kind of glossed over some of those mistakes. But I just think that Butch Jones just found a number of issues. But really, I think his moves and in the strength and conditioning program, you cannot overlook that. He ran off Dave Lawson for some reasons that are still pretty mysterious to this day. And Dave Lawson's as respected in the strength and conditioning community as anybody in the country. But he ran him off. He made changes at the head of the nutrition program, and then he lost Mike DeBoer. And I think those 3 things and some discontentment among players really doomed Butch Jones. And I think the stage ended up sort of swallowing him a little bit.
Great insight into Tennessee football from John Bryce. You can check him out at Gridiron now on Tennessee and the rest of the SEC right there. John, we appreciate you stopping by for the first time here at Mark Rogers TV. Hopefully it won't be the last time.
I hope not, Mark. Thanks a lot.